I think what we need to do is have our report outs from the breakout rooms. And if I divide the 15 minutes by 6 breakout rooms, that's 2.5 minutes each report out. So why don't we call on whoever's reporting for breakout room 1?
Is that us, Norm?
It is.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Howard Purcell reporting out for Breakout Room 1. Some of the most important activities we identified were to lobby legislators to pass the bills to fund New Mexico's water, and especially to target leadership, chairs of the Finance Committee, George Munoz, Patty Ledstrom, Mimi Stewart, and other legislators critical to making sure that these bills can pass. We also agreed that the water advocates should prepare a letter to the legislators that individuals and groups can sign on to. It sounded to me like a petition, and that was an idea that was raised. And lastly, there should be funding for the strategic water reserve that comes out of non-recurring funds. And those are the most salient things that came out of our group, I think, unless somebody can add anything that I've forgotten.
Good point.
Can you explain what you mean by the non-recurring funds?
No, but the person who raised that might be able to.
Hi, this is Dale. It's the non-recurring funds would be funds that aren't part of the agency's budgets, and it's only like currently it would be only a one-time funding because of some of the large amount of funds that they have to spend this fiscal year. So it would make it less controversial.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Thanks.
Okay, are we ready for Breakout Group 2?
I think yes.
For Breakout Group 2. I got to facilitate and no one volunteered to present this, so I will give you my best rundown. I think our group's conversation kind of centered around the need for the political will behind this strategy. It sounds like similar to Group 1. And so we had a state representative, Tara Lujan, in our group, and she relayed that there is the political will, at least at the legislature this year, and that this is a great time to really make a push for funding for this strategy. And there was a lot of conversation about kind of building the storytelling part to making this a more effective messaging process. So creating stories about, our interactions with the land, creating stories about our kids and grandkids and their perhaps needs for water in the future. So really having impactful stories to help make the message more useful and direct. I think there was a very small conversation, which I took personally, about not sending the scientist into the conversation. Perhaps that is a good point, that scientists sometimes are a little too high or too low for the legislative level. So I think that was mainly just me being particular. So yeah, and there's some really good advocates in the state of New Mexico, and to get some of those folks involved in this process would be really helpful. So I will submit the Jamboard for the group. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to number 3.
I've got number 3. We had 3 central themes that we discussed for most of our period. The first was the funding for proper data acquisition and water accounting. We must know how much water we have and where it is and how we're going to move it around. The second point was on education. And this was one we spent a tremendous amount of time talking about how poorly understood the water problem is in New Mexico. And particularly in the cities where it was felt that there was no end to the amount of water that we could collect, and that we must transform our society to understand water is precious and we must conserve it at all times. And then the third topic that we discussed in great detail was equitable distribution. Who gets the water? And there were several organizations that were cited for using more than their fair share, one of which was Rio Rancho. So those were the three topics that we centered our conversation around, and I think everybody had a very productive evening. Thank you.
Nice, thanks.
Okay, number 4.
I will jump in like Stacy. I was the moderator for breakout group number 4 and didn't manage to pawn off the reporting on anybody else. So I will step forward and do that. We had quite a diverse group representing a lot of different interests. They put those onto the Jamboard. People who are with various advocacy organizations, climate change related organizations, ones that work on nuclear issues, so affect water quality. So from that group, that diverse group, we had a discussion about focusing quite a bit of time on question number 2, what do we and do we not understand about the proposal that the water advocates have put forward? And our conversations focused there on the devil being in the detail about this rotational fallowing program. Concern about the fact that we have a priority administration system and we're talking about sort of giving money to farmers who might not have their water supply anyway, or what's the situation when there isn't a full supply, and that's really when we'll need to do this fallowing. Do we pay the farmers who give up their allocation as if they were about to get a full supply? It just seems like there's a lot of devil in the detail issues about that fallowing program. So our concentration on the questions kind of focused there. Then we got into the specific suggestions, and I'd say that overall, the consensus was that these kinds of changes take a long time to put into place. You can't just go to a particular legislature a few weeks ahead of time and say, here's our ideas, please implement this. It'll likely take multiple years. So those who work regularly with the legislature say that for a given budget, just for short-term funding, you need to start working with that legislature at least 6 months ahead of time. Starting with the Senate's Natural Resources and Water Committee, but working through with all of the legislators in both of the houses that we know understand something about water, but even with them, it'll take a long time of vetting. So in the meantime, we can be working on the kinds of things that Stacy's heading up in improving our metering, our data collection, our monitoring and database development, so that when we get into that conversation, we have the information that we need to do that. And then finally, on the question on the second page, what actions are most achievable? I think the consensus grew from the previous question, which is it's most achievable if we put in the work for a long period of time, and we have people who are willing to just keep at it year after year, which is, I think, actually the role, that's just me talking, that the Water Advocates has been playing. There needs to be involvement of the public. I love what Stacy said about incorporating stories that people can relate to, so that people are engaged for long periods of time. That's really the only way to make fundamental change. So thanks for your time. That was Breakout 4.
Okay, time for number 5.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emma, and I was also the facilitator for Group 5. I was kindly voluntold by my group to be our speaker. I just want to shout out, we had a really amazing group of diverse folks. Paul, Hannah, Walker, Oscar, Christine, Noe, Paul, and Jennifer. We spanned a lot of generations of people who have experience in New Mexico, people that just moved to New Mexico, students, actual ISC and OSC employees, former lobbyists. It was a really, really amazing group, and I'm lucky that I got to talk with them all. So we really kind of honed in, I think, most specifically on just the lack of capacity at our state water agencies and how that impacts and kind of trickles down to the general public. So we had a couple of folks who are, regional or rural water users and volunteer commissioners and managers for their water systems. And really, it was clear to me that if they don't have the support at the state level because those agencies don't have the staff to do so, it really impacts that local level pretty substantially. And so we had a kind of veteran lobbyist in our group who has a lot of guidance on how to kind of advocate for these types of bills and legislation. And we have a lot of great notes in our Jamboard about it. But I think one thing that was really targeted is having publicly available information from the water advocates about, when these bills get filed, who the sponsoring legislators are, what their bill number is, when they're at committee, when public comment is going to be accepted. Because I think, in this group here that we have today, 60 people, there's a lot of individual support. And so people just really, I think, need the direction and have the knowledge of when they can kind of make their voice heard. Other than that, I think similar to what a lot of folks have said, telling a story, allowing for public comment, potential testimonials from individuals impacted by the strategy and just kind of really trying to develop that grassroots support is going to be key here. So thank you to my group, and I'll pass it to group 6.
And I was the facilitator for group 6, and they also nominated me to present out. We talked a lot about collaboration and bringing all kinds of different constituents to the table, including constituents within the MRG, the South Valley, people even further south, making sure that they have a voice in this, but then also collaborating with larger groups, including, other state groups that focus on water, and with federal agencies that have a say in some of this as well. We talked about, that it might be important to present this as a crisis. We are in it. And while it's easy to ignore it if you're not in it every day, one way to talk to the legislatures about why this is so important could be doing some 30-second videos with people who have already been impacted by this. Farmers who didn't get enough water supply last year, dead trees in the urban center that used to get fed from the acequia system and are no longer getting that water. We talked about keeping it really, really simple, making sure that we have a fact sheet, bullet points, infographics, things that people of all backgrounds can understand. I think a lot of us here have a pretty in-depth knowledge about water rights in New Mexico, but a lot of the constituents that we're representing don't. And so it's important to not overwhelm them with the details, but to really give them a concise way to understand this and bring that to their legislators. And we talked about maybe doing radio and newspaper editorials to get the word to further reaches. And one thing that I thought was also important was reminding the governor of the promises she made during her campaign. And, what are we going to do if she doesn't follow through on those promises going forward? Some of the other things that we talked about was, this is really great planning and collaboration in this breakout session, but it would also be really helpful to see the actual language of the proposed bills and what are we actually bringing forward to the legislation this session? Are we behind the 8 ball, or have those bills been written yet? So those are all things that we discussed and would like more information on. One of my wonderful collaborators in my breakout group asked if there was a way we could circulate both Stacy and Norm's presentations from the beginning of this session. And then I know that someone else wasn't able to attend the very first session, and they asked if there's a way that we could get the recording for that as well out to everybody. I think that does it. I apologize to my group if I missed anything important.
Okay, thank you guys. And I think we're going to switch to Norm for closing remarks. But what I'd like to say is come back Saturday when the strategy du jour is going to be reform water governance. Norm, you got 5 minutes for closing remarks.
Well, by the clock, our meeting time is over. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And the Water Advocates is a small organization. We're all volunteers. We have some younger board members, but most of us are of my generation. You brought us some great ideas tonight, and we would really appreciate you helping us out to make those real. We don't have the bills drafted yet. We are behind the 8 ball. New Mexico is behind the 8 ball. But as has been noted, there is a lot of legislative support. The Water Advocates started with the Water and Natural Resources Committee with a letter in June that created a panel on what we need to do in August. And there are a couple of bills that have been pre-filed already that provide funding for the agencies, and I think we need to expand that out. The staff numbers are just insufficient, and we've got to augment staff. I think that's one of the most important things. And when I say augment staff, I'm talking about the agency staff. We would love to have you all volunteer to join us to augment our efforts so that we can provide responses and do a good job with the excellent suggestions you've given us tonight.